Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in to my presentation today. I'm really excited to share this because honestly, the stuff we studied this summer helped me get my oldest child to eat something else besides rice and dino chicken nuggets. The title of my project is Motivation Mastery: Retraining Beliefs and Rebuilding Value in Early Childhood. Now, I know that sounds fancy, but this is about putting a stop to the exhausting daily power struggles we face with the little ones. When they flat out refuse to eat anything green on their plate, or they totally shut down and refuse to read. I'm guessing some of you are parents or teachers or work with kids in some way, and you've probably been there. So today I want to show you how we can use expectancy value theory and causal attribution theory to completely shift their mindset without having to resort to bribes, sticker charts, or yelling, which I know I have been guilty of doing. So here's a quick look at what we're going to cover. I promise I'm not just going to read the slides to you. First, I want to share a couple of real life headaches I was dealing with at home, one with picky eating and one with reading. Then we'll look at the actual science behind why kids do this, breaking down the theories we learned in class in plain English. After that, I'll give you four super practical hands on strategies I actually tested out in the field, including a cool blueprint called the Flavor Scientist Lab that you can try this week or sometime in the summer. And finally, we'll talk about how to tweak these strategies for all kinds of different learners. And I'll share some of my own personal aha moments from this project. All right, let's dive in. The reality of early childhood motivation issues. So let's start with the drama. I was dealing with two major roadblocks situations at home with my daughter. First, she became an incredibly picky eater. When she was a toddler, she eat pretty much anything, but then the second she hit kindergarten, it was like a switch flipped. Her acceptable food list shrank to almost nothing, and on top of that, she has a really sensitive physical gag reflex. So when we tried the old school parenting, where we're like, you're not leaving the table until you eat your broccoli. She would get really stressed, cry, and then she'd eventually throw up what was in her mouth. And it was pretty awful. Meal times, they became this high stress zone filled with tears and anxiety. So it was definitely stressful. The second issue was reading. When it came time to practice reading, if I handed her a full book, she'd look at the pages and see that there were no pictures. She'd sigh and just close the book and just completely check out. So we tried everything. We did the sticker charts, we did timers, and we promised her treats, and none of it worked. I think it made her a little bit more anxious, really, but recently she started showing just a tiny bit of natural curiosity again. And I think it's because she's at that age where she sees her peers eat things or try things and she's not tried and now she's curious. So I realized this was my window to kind of step in with a different approach and focusing on how she thought about these tasks rather than just trying to force her to do them. Theoretical foundation expectancy value theory. Okay, so why do kids shut down like this? Well, to understand it, we have to take a look at the first theory from our class, expectancy value theory. So it sounds fancy, but it basically boils down to a simple equation: motivation equals expectancy times value. So if either of those is zero, the motivation is zero. So think of expectancy as the kid asking themselves, if I try this, can I actually do it? So it's all about um, self efficacy. So for my daughter, her expectancy with new food was zero. She thought, if I eat this, I'm just going to gag and get sick. So what's the point? So now we look at value. Value has a few different parts, but the most important one for little kids is cost. Cost is the downside. So it's the mental, emotional energy a task takes. If the physiological cost, like fear, anxiety, or feeling stupid, is way too high, it doesn't matter how much value we try to force on them. Um, the cost completely crushes their motivation and they shut down to protect themselves. It's actually a total logical survival instinct on their part. Theoretical foundation two, causal attribution theory. So, our second theory is Bernard Weiner's causal attribution theory. This is all about the stories we tell ourselves when we succeed or when we fail. So, when something goes wrong, we immediately ask, why did that happen? So, according to the theory, our explanations fall into three categories: the locus, stability, and controllability. Locus is about whether the cause is inside us or outside of the world. And stability is about whether the cause is permanent or temporary. And the controllability is whether we can actually do something to change it. So here's the danger zone. So when a kid experiences a setback and decides this is internal, stable, and uncontrollable, they fall straight into that learned helplessness. So they start to think, well, I failed because I'm bad at this, and I'm always going to be bad at this, and there's nothing I can do to change that. And once a kid's brain gets stuck in that loop, they stop trying. So I think our job as parents and teachers is to break that script and help them rewrite those attributions. Right, shifting the mindset, the mechanics of attributional retraining. So let's take a look at my daughter's brain was processing picky eating before we did this project. Um, Her internal script was, I'm a picky eater and my body is built to hate vegetables. So if I put that carrot in my mouth, it will make me sick. So look at that attribution. The locus was internal, and she blamed her own biology. The stability was stable. She thought she'd be like this forever, and she felt she had zero control over it. So because she expected physical pain, the perceived cost of trying a vegetable was sky high. So it's no wonder that she would scream and cry. Um, and then I realized that we needed to do some attributional retraining. So we had to change the story she was telling herself. We needed to shift her way of thinking from my body is broken to, well, the flavor depends on how things are cooked, and cooking is something we can experiment with. So we wanted to make it external, temporary, and controllable. So the strategy, the flavor scientist lab. All right, so this brings us to the first strategy I tried, the flavor scientist lab. I decided to gamify dinner. I told my daughter she wasn't being forced to eat things that she didn't like anymore. Instead, that she was going to now be the head flavor scientist in our kitchen lab. And her only job was to collect data. So when I told her that, her eyes lit up and she um, immediately was excited about it. So I took one food she avoided her whole life, which is carrots, and I prepared them three totally different ways to show that flavor isn't fixed. We had sample A, which was raw and crunchy. Sample B was roasted with savory spices, basically just salt and pepper and some olive oil. And sample C, I steamed the carrots and added some butter, some honey, and some brown sugar. So when she tasted the raw carrot and didn't care for it, instead of letting her say, I don't like this, that's why I hate carrots, I stepped in to rewrite her attribution. And I said, all right, awesome data. You don't like it because sample A's cooking style is too crunchy for your taste buds right now. And she was totally fine with that. And I made her write that down in her data journal. So basically just said, well, that just means your taste buds haven't practiced the specific prep style yet. So that's okay. We're moving on. And then she tried the roasted carrot version and she actually liked it. So I immediately jumped on that. And I was like, wow, look at that. We changed the way we cooked the carrot, and now your taste buds gave us a different data, and you actually have the power to change how things taste. So it completely broke her I'm a picky eater rule and proved to her that taste is just temporary and controllable variable. All right, strategy two, incremental reading, scaffolding expectancy. So now let's take a look about the academic side of things, specifically reading avoidance. So if a kid is struggling with reading and you hand them a whole book and they don't see a fun story, they just see a giant mountain of words, which equals work to them, um, the psychological cost goes through the roof and their expectancy of success drops to zero. So I use expectancy value theory to change the structure of that task. Instead of setting a 20-minute timer and forcing my daughter to read a whole book, we did just incremental reading. So I just took a blank index card and covered the page, exposing only one single sentence at a time. So we set little tiny um, immediate pause points, and every time she finished a sentence, we did a quick high five, and she slid the card down to the next one. And by shrinking the task, we immediately lowered the cost. Reading one sentence felt totally doable. So it wasn't her expectancy shot up. So it wasn't a big chore anymore. And she knocked out sentence after sentence, and she finally, got rapid fire series of wins, and it rebuilt her confidence so fast and realized, hey, I can actually read whole chapter books. I don't have to make sure that they have, comics or pictures in it in every other page or in every page. Strategy three, strategic cognitive framing. So, strategy number three is something we can all change in our daily language right now. So, process oriented feedback. We talk a lot in psychology about Carol Dweck's growth mindset research. A lot of times we accidentally mess up our kids' attributions with our praise. And when we say things like, oh, wow, you're so smart, or you're a natural more reader. So, we're reinforcing a stable internal trait. And the problem with that is the second the kid hits a hard book or a tough math problem, they think, oh no, I struggled, so I guess I'm not a naturally smart kid anymore. It's the same thing when we label a kid as a picky eater in front of other people. They hear that and they think, well, okay, this is who I am. And I've been guilty of doing that many of times when, I would talk to someone and my kid would be there and I was like, yeah, she's very picky. And she would kind of grin and say, yeah, that's me. So I made a rule to scrub these labels. So when she reads a tough word, I didn't say, "Oh, you're so smart" anymore. It's like, "Oh, I love how you use your strategy to sound that out." And when she tries a new food, I'm gonna praise her and for her effort and willingness to explore, which we actually did a lot of that during our vacation when we went to Orlando. Um, as everyone knows, when you go on vacation, that's your excuse to eat out. And so when she would try things from my husband or my plate, we'd be like, "Wow, we give you um, a high five, and we think that's really awesome of you to start exploring and be willing to try new foods." So this teaches the kids that success comes from strategy and effort and things that they can actually control. All right, so interest driven utility value integration. Our fourth strategy is about boosting task value by tapping into what kids already care about. So, honestly, things like vocabulary drills and math worksheets hold zero appeal for a kid who just wants to play, right? They don't care about long term goals. First grader, second grader, they don't care. So, to bridge that gap, we can inject instant value by wrapping the boring task in their favorite things. So if a kid is obsessed with dinosaurs or space or building Legos, we can make sure that those themes are all over their learning materials. So for our reading sessions, we picked books featuring my daughter's absolute favorite cartoon characters, or she absolutely loves weather. She wants to be a meteorologist, so make sure it's weather related. And when we did math, we used the preferred treats or objects like those number block cubes as counting blocks. And suddenly she wasn't doing boring homework. She was playing with the things that she liked and she um, felt in control. So it's a simple little trick, but it totally bypasses the perceived cost of the task by just cranking up the fun. So, application to diverse and exceptional learners. So now, as future educators, parents, and leaders, we have to remember that these strategies aren't one size fits all, right? Every kid, they have different needs. So take striving readers or kids learning English as a second language. They're dealing with massive cognitive overload. So for them, using strategy two, breaking things down into tiny bite-sized steps, that's going to be a lifesaver for them. And it protects their self-confidence and keeps them from drowning in anxiety, which we don't want them doing, right? And so kids with exceptionalities like sensory processing issues, we have to respect their physical limits. So a hypersensitive gag reflex is a real physical barrier. It's not a behavioral problem. So forcing compliance there is just going to cause drama. And something like the Flavor Scientist Lab that I created works great because it gives them predictable, safe control over their environment. And let's not forget about our gifted kids. They often struggle with intense perfectionism because they've been praised for being smart their whole lives. So they desperately need strategy three, so process praise. So they learn that making mistakes is just part of the learning strategy, not a sign that they're failing. So, summary of professional and personal learning. Reflecting on this whole semester, this project has honestly changed how I look at both parenting and education. I used to think that parenting was, about behavior compliance, using the whole carrots and sticks to get a kid to do what you want. But I've learned that, it's a really short sighted approach. Yeah, you might get them to clean their dinner plate today. You're lucky. But you're destroying their long term motivation and building up a ton of resentment, which we don't want to do. So, on a personal level, this taught me to practice real empathy. So, I finally realized that, my daughter's meltdowns at dinner or, her refusing to read weren't her just being a stubborn brat. They were her way of protecting herself from things she felt scary and impossible. And once I understood that, making more sense to, once I shifted my own attitude from anger to curiosity, daily power struggles, they got a lot easier to deal with. And, I stopped fighting her behavior and started focusing on rebuilding her beliefs. So, to wrap things up, I just want to leave you with this core thought. A kid's motivation is not set in stone, it's highly flexible. It's a changing thing. We have the power to help shape them. So my challenge for you all this week is to stop fighting the behaviors and start retraining the beliefs. Step away from the power struggles, the forced fights, and the angry homework sessions. Try running that flavor scientist lab in your kitchen or using index cards to scaffold a reading session and watch how quickly a kid's defensiveness melts away when you take away that fear of failure. And then show them challenges are going to be temporary. Give them real control over their own progress. Thanks so much for listening today. I hope I'm able to help at least one struggling person out there.